is the Pegasus Podcast, presented by Night Sports Now. UCF news, views, and a few hot takes. Now, here are your hosts, Bailey Go Knights Adams and Christian Charge On Simmons.
Welcome into episode 259. Be sure you're following us on Twitter at BaileyJAdams22, at @ByCASimmons, at Night Sports Now, and at Pegasus Podcast. You can also email us at PegasusPodcast@ksn@gmail.com. Christian, how's it going?
Going well. I'm healthier than I was when we recorded a week ago, so that's a very good thing for me.
Do I have permission to make you laugh on this podcast?
Yes, I can now laugh without coughing most of the time. So we are.
Oh, okay, most of the time.
We are thriving. We're back doing excellent. Yep.
That's good. Good news. Good news,
it's always great. I feel like I have a new appreciation for being healthy. Like I always forget this. I don't know. That. Maybe this is a me thing. Whenever I get sick, it's like I forget what it feels like to be healthy. Like I can't remember what not being sick feels like when I'm sick. So then once you're past it, it's like the best.
So you're not gonna be able to relate to this because somehow you're one of the people without allergies. But as a person who deals with allergies around this time every year, I have that feeling like on a day-to-day basis where like yesterday I woke up and I felt awful. Like my head was clogged and I could not do anything to get rid of it. And I was like, man, I forgot what it was like yesterday when I wasn't like having a runny nose and like sneezing every 5 seconds. And even today, like I woke up this morning, it was like, wow, I don't feel good. And I just I don't know. I can't do anything to help it. And yeah, I don't know. I'm okay right now though.
Yeah, I guess I should keep that in mind when I'm bemoaning how hard it is to be sick. When you literally you're just sick for like half the year, basically, like every single year.
It depends on the day. Some days I'll wake up and I'll be fine, and then other days it's just I can't really function. It's not great.
I'm sure allergies will come for me eventually, right?
Is that a thing?
I think develop as you get older.
Okay, interesting. I don't know. I never had that. Like I've never thought of that as a concept. I started having them like. I don't know. I think I was in like second or third grade when I was playing Little League baseball. That's all I really remember. I remember one day being at one of my games and then all of a sudden just like having allergies at the game. And I was like, this sucks. And it's been like that ever since. So no one really cares about this. This has been an interesting start to the podcast.
No, we love some good sickness and allergy talk to start the podcast. You know what else is sick? All the money some UCF athletes are going to be bringing home thanks to a new NIL deal.
That was great. That was fantastic. Yeah, they announced or Noble. We had this before the podcast where I said it how they say it. The brand Noble, they say it pretty fast, so it sounds like Noble, Noble, but it's Nobull. Announced a bunch of player endorsements on Monday, and that's cool. And you wanted to talk about it.
Yeah, I just have to say before we started recording, I was the one who said, hey, we should talk about this at the top of the podcast. And then you said to me right before we started recording, Jakari Brown is a noble athlete. And I thought, or you said Taven Jackson. You said Taven Jackson he wasn't not a noble athlete. And I thought you were telling me he's not a mobile athlete. And I was about to explain to you that while his rushing stats don't reflect it, he is kind of athletic. And then I got even more confused and thought you were saying noble, like Noble.
He's not a noble man.
Yeah, and I was just sitting here and I was like, what reference am I missing where we're saying Taven Jackson isn't a noble human being? And then I got there in the end to the topic that I had suggested. Yes. So that was pretty cool. But yeah, so I have the list of athletes from Brandon Helwig tweeted it. So the players who announced noble endorsements are John Walker, Chasen Johnson, Miles Montgomery, Dylan Risk, Cam Fancher, for some reason, Lewis Carter, Grant Reddick, Guard Memelar, Sincere Edwards, Braden Marshall, Jakari Brown. It's basically like all the important players and then also Cam Fancher and Jakari Brown. So kind of interesting. But yeah, I the reason I wanted to bring it up is because I've already seen like a couple comments on social media and I just wanted to explain that this is so – I feel like we just need to do the big reminder because – I always forget, like, we live this. I feel like me more than you because I'm just obsessed with all the comings and goings of college football, and I just read about it constantly.
Me, not so much. It's actually actively annoying me.
You get it anyway because every time I see any of it, I immediately text you about it.
I'll also like you'll know when I don't care about something or when I just don't have time for it because I'm just like I'm not answering that.
You don't answer a lot of it, but I'm also at the point, and it's probably just annoying. Like I will read a whole article, then send you the article knowing you're not going to read it, and then send you like my takeaways from the article, and I'm just like, here you go. Like it's like for some
this is interesting because actually I appreciate that you send me your takeaways because then I don't have to read the article.
Yeah, but then you don't reply to the message. You just read it, and then it's like the.
I do retain some of it, I guess.
I'm not looking for a reply. I view it as keeping our podcast informed. And I also just I like the sound of my own voice, and that carries into texting too. So it works out for me. But yeah, so just as a reminder for fans, NIL is changing starting in July. Everything is going to move to rev share. If rev share is not a term you've heard before, you probably didn't listen to last week's episode, but the way rev share works is now schools for the first time in history get to just directly pay players. So we are, in theory, moving away from all these collectives and the things of the last 5 years or so, I guess 3 or 4 years or so, of schools can't pay players directly. So they ask fans to donate to a collective, and the collective pays them, but it's not technically pay for play, blah, blah, blah. All that's moving to the side. Now schools can just straight up give players money. There's going to be a cap on how much money schools can distribute to players. And I believe it's like $21.5 or $22 million. And that's for all of athletics, not just for football. And that's where the money is going to come from now. NIL is not going away, but the NCAA, and we'll see, this is an if, is claiming that schools cannot use NIL to just straight up circumvent the cap. They're having a clearinghouse that's going to be run by Deloitte that is going to evaluate each individual NIL deal that all the players in the country sign and determine if they are market value or not. I'm a little skeptical of that because I don't think market value is a thing that you can just define. I think the market sets itself, and it's what a company or individual thinks a player is worth. But all that being said, the point is that what they're trying to prevent is they're claiming that, like, when Alabama hits their however much money they give to their football team, $11-13 million, whatever it is, they can't then have one of their boosters, sign a player and say, like, hey, I want you to do an ad for my Ferrari dealership. Please tweet 5 times and I'll give you $10 million. Like, that would be killed by the clearinghouse because that is not market value. So what's interesting about this is that UCF is going to be doing rev share like all the Power 4 schools. So this is outside of that. So I'm curious about this. And this was Mike Repoli. Is that how you say it?
I don't know.
Repoli. I think it's Repoli who it's like, it's been reported, I think you all know, has been like a major benefactor for UCF and has provided them with a lot of money and all that. This kind of feels like UCF being big time a little bit, because I think this is essentially sort of a circumvention of the cap. I don't think that Noble is going to dramatically benefit from Cam Fancher doing ads. I think this is basically a UCF booster and benefactor helping UCF circumvent the cap not in a way that the clearinghouse would kill, to be clear. I'm not maybe circumvent's the wrong word, but this is kind of UCF being big time, that these are guys who are already some guys who are already going to be paid through rev share who can get some additional money outside of that as well. This is exactly how you want to see UCF operating.
Yeah, and I think that's probably what's so interesting to me is what the value is, like you said, to Noble or to any of these brands that are doing it. Like, some of them, I think will benefit from more than others, depending on who the player is. But I think obviously, and I don't think it's fully UCF's obviously benefiting too. But I think this is a really cool thing for the players, just because I'm sure that through these deals, they're also probably getting Noble gear. Like, they got shoes. And because this Noble is hadn't heard of it ever until a few years ago when I went to the NFL Combine. Like, they were the sponsor of the Combine for 2023 and 2024. So all the players are coming out for interviews wearing Noble beanies and shirts and shoes and whatever. And now it's benefiting UCF, which is great. So I love that brand. But yeah, I think it's a cool thing for the players, which I think it's not obviously what is all about at this point in college football and college athletics, but I think it's back to the root of who this is supposed to be for, which I think that's cool.
Well, that's what the NCAA is trying with this new format. With rev share is now it's the schools will pay the players the money, which is they're still not calling it pay for play for some reason, but it is they get paid salaries from the school from a cap that no team can go over. And then NIL, what they're trying to enforce with the clearinghouse and all that is it's supposed to be like this. They're trying to get NIL to be what it was actually, what we thought it was going to be 5 years ago. When this was coming through, we didn't think it was going to be, I didn't even know what the hell a collective was. The concept didn't exist. We thought it was going to be things like this. Companies often owned by boosters, helping players out, giving them opportunities to, use their NIL, their name, image, and likeness to promote stuff. So it's interesting. And now we're going to go from the realm of what we know to theorizing. Because I can't help but note that every quarterback, except the one most people think is going to start, has a Noble deal. And I'm not what I'm curious about, because so UCF has a cap now. There is only a certain amount they can spend on their on all their athletes and athletics. I'm sure they have an internal cap for football. Is this a situation where they're basically using this to you don't want to be spending cap money on a Cam Fancher or a Jakari Brown, guys who probably aren't going to contribute. So Is this sort of the deal? Like, hey, we can't get you rev share, but like we'll get you a little something on the NIL side.
That is an interesting lens to look at it through, because what I was kind of wondering, and again, this is all speculation, but with Taven Jackson, I wonder if like, okay, they gave him X amount of dollars from the cap. They gave Dylan Risk X amount of dollars from the cap. Like the guys who they think might be at the top of the depth chart as of right now in March 10th. And then we're also like, all right, we want to like keep everybody involved. Like you said, keep everybody involved, but like here's the leftover. Like we don't need to give Taven Jackson any of this noble stuff because he's probably getting the most out of our cap. And again, I'm pretty much just describing cap circumvention, but they're doing it in a way that you're allowed to do.
That Deloitte headline is going to hit like crack when it's like, actually, we think Cam Fancher sucks, so he doesn't get to have the money. I don't, and this is where, like, I'm telling you, I want to believe, because this is a college football system that I can genuinely get behind. Whether you're Alabama or Rice, you have the same amount of cap you can go up to. And I just looked up, it's $20.5 million is the cap year, and the cap's going to grow each year. And that's it. And obviously, not every team can spend that. The AAC just caught a lot of flack this week because they put out, the AAC has determined that to remain a member in the league, you must be distributing $10 million of rev share over a 3-year period, which obviously is like nothing. But if you're in the AAC, but at the same time, like there's some AAC schools that might not hit that. So I'm not sure what the hell that's going to be like for them. But this is a system I can get behind. And it's just the part I'm skeptical on is how long is it going to be? Like this all goes into effect in July. Like surely by like August, some SEC booster is going to try to sign an athlete to an absurd, not market value deal. Something like what we just said, like post on social media 5 times, I'll give you $10 million. And then the clearinghouse will come and kill that. And what happens then? Do they just kill it, or does that booster file a lawsuit? And then
if history
does
is
a judge,
indication,
you know what I mean?
If history is any indication, that booster will be from the University of Florida. So
yes.
we'll be real close to it here. And I'm in Tampa, you're in Orlando. But yeah, it won't take long. You're right. It will be probably within a month or two before the first game kicks off. Right. Let's see. It feels safe.
I think this will be like a fall camp storyline. Will be the booster trying to do this, and maybe it won't work. Maybe they will back down and whatever. But it's like all these rules that college football has changed from the playoff to NIL to transfer portal. Not one thing has gone off the way it was supposed to. It's always like they do it, and then we go, oh wait, we all didn't think about this very obvious consequence, and then it gets ruined. So like I don't know, but if it works, then this is a system that's a lot more beneficial for UCF, particularly since they have a booster who is willing to help players out on the NIL side of things, because not every school has that.
Yeah, and it's funny that you say like it will be a fall camp storyline, because it would be like almost fitting, because was last year it was the playoff stuff, right? Like the future of the playoff format that was like dominating headlines like up until like the week's games were starting, and everyone was like, thank God the season is starting because I don't want to talk about this anymore. That might be what happens this year. Is it's going to be a huge, back and forth of like, how is this going to be legal? How are we going to be able to like resolve this? And then everyone's like, let's just start the games. Like, come on. And I think
also, keep in mind the other storyline here is that there are going to be college football playoff games played in right about 9 months from today. And they still don't have like a finalized format for that. And it's in 9 months because they're still fighting right now. The SEC and the Big Ten want them to change the auto bid so that it doesn't go to conference champions and it's just the top 4 seeds. And they're still fighting about that. And the games are being played in 9 months.
I don't want to throw the entire podcast in a completely different direction, but help me out here. I thought the idea originally was that the playoff format could not be changed for 2 seasons. Is that not a thing anymore?
So you are correct. The playoff format cannot be changed for 2 seasons unless there is a unanimous vote. If there is a unanimous vote, anything can be changed. By the way, keep in mind, for 2026, like next year, there is currently no playoff format.
Yes.
They signed a 6-year contract with ESPN for like $1 gazillion. And in the contract, it says, we don't have a format yet. We'll figure that part out later. There are safeguards. There are safeguards that Notre Dame must be included. The highest ranked G5 team must be included. And that's kind of it. So they're still fighting about that. Now, I'm going to drill the podcast now. Just if you're interested in the playoff stuff, I'll say it really quickly. You're probably saying to yourself, well, why would there ever be unanimous change? Obviously, the Big 12 doesn't want to give up their conference champion getting a bye in the first round this year. Starting in 2026, the way that contract is structured is the SEC and Big 10 can kind of just do whatever they want. And the rest of the schools and conferences have to go along with it. So it's kind of a concessions thing right now. Like if you help out the SEC and Big Ten and give them what they want now, will they be more amenable to things you might want in the next contract? Do you want to piss them off and get them mad now and then they'll just screw you in the next contract? So it's one of those things, but we are like literally still just not like for the next, I mean, as of right now, March 10th, 2025, we just actually don't know what the college football postseason is going to look like really at any point. So it's kind of cool.
I guess the key thing here is I forgot that the SEC and Big Ten are still actively trying to kill the sport. So yeah, that makes sense.
And they will succeed within the next 10-ish years. Like this is all ending eventually, but we're going to enjoy it while it keeps going. UCF will always be playing football games, just not at the highest level of sport for long, because eventually they're going to break off into their own thing. Really quickly for rev share, and just to circle back, and then we can get on with like the actual topic of the podcast. I don't believe most schools have not. I don't believe UCF has said what their distribution is going to be, but Texas Tech is one of the schools who have publicly said how they're going to distribute rev shares. Just to give you an idea, Texas Tech is doing 74% for their football team, 17% for men's basketball, 2% for women's basketball, 2% for baseball, and the last 4% is for all the other sports. That equates financial-wise $15.1 million for the football roster, $3.6 million for men's basketball, $400,000 for women's basketball, $390,000 for baseball, and then $920,000 for everything else. I think most Power 4 schools are going to be in that general category. We'll see how UCF decides to not give money to basketball as part of that, but I think most that will be generally in that category.
Can't wait for that breakdown.
I can't wait for the UCF breakdown. It's like exactly the same as everyone else, except like men's basketball, 1%.
I don't want to get into it. All right, the actual topic we're here to talk about: spring football. Spring football starting soon? Question mark. We're basically at the time of the year we did this last year. We did our biggest questions heading into spring ball. They did announce, obviously, which we'll get onto more later, that they will have 2 spring scrimmages open.
Yep, exciting.
In April, which is very exciting. So yeah, this is our spring football preview, our biggest questions heading into spring, which feels different than it has in recent years because every spring there's questions to ask and we can always come up with something. This time it was like we could just ask a million questions and we have to narrow this down somehow because we don't know what this football team looks like pretty much at all. How many starters do you think we know?
Okay, let's think about this. Cam Fancher at quarterback, obviously, so that's one.
The
no-bull deal proves that. We don't. I mean, God, it's. I don't like this question because now I'm realizing how few it is. I don't know because even I was going to say a couple obvious ones, and even then I'm like, well, we're just assuming that. I don't know. I mean, the whole roster turned over. So John. I mean, let's start on defense. John Walker's a starter. Nigel Lee Kelly. I think the D line we can kind of put together for the most part, but it quickly gets shaky. Even linebacker, it's like we think we know, but I don't know.
It's insane, really, how little we know. And again, like with the way spring football is headed, we're not going to have much of these answers in just 15 practices or whatever it is, in about a month and a half. But let's ask these questions anyway and see what we can maybe hope to gather from what we get out of the spring. Starting with, I think, just on offense, what does a Scott Frost offense look like in 2025? Because in his opening press conference back when he got hired, he kind of was like, yeah, we'll go fast, but like it was way different than his introductory press conference in 2015. So it was clear that like they can't just go all fast all the time. He's learned some stuff. So I'm just curious like what it's going to look like this time around.
Do you realize this is our first ever spring preview podcast where Gus Malzahn is not the coach?
Yeah, wow. That's weird. I thought the way you were going to end that sentence is like, isn't it weird that we're doing a podcast about a Scott Frost coach football team? Which we kind of
weirder though. Sort
of did like in early iterations of Night Sports Now, but not. We did like 4 episodes maybe.
I think what's really stupid, like generationally dumb, is I just it's like in my head, it just feels like the 2017 vibes are back. And and it's like, I'm trying to clarify how I mean that. I don't mean like, I'm like, yeah, they're going to go undefeated. It just like Frost being back in my brain has weirdly pushed all the time he was gone, like a little to the periphery. And it just kind of feels like similar nostalgic type feelings to like, not just 2017 to me, but like 2016 too. Like that was my first year covering the team. I don't know. It's like, it's very stupid because everything is completely different. Like nothing is the same. Frost has even said he's not sure that he can play basketball with the players anymore. Like it's a totally different uncharted world, but yeah, the offense question,
now, right?
I think he's in his 50. Yeah, I think he just turned 50. Which right before we started recording, happy birthday to Bailey, by the way. Had your birthday a couple days ago. Welcome to being 27, where I will remain for one more week. You told me that you are now old because you're 27.
I was joking, obviously.
You really didn't say it in a tone like you were joking, but
I did because it was in. I forgot what the context the conversation was. But yeah, I was just like, well, yeah, now I'm old, so.
You and Scott Frost, two old men. That was all to say. I was going to say, I don't think 50 is that old, but then I remembered that we've actually on this podcast believe 27 is old. So if that's the case, then 50 is like ancient. But yeah, the offense question is really interesting because I do think, unsurprisingly, a lot of, especially the casual fan base, maybe not so much the folks who are like, so into it that you're listening to UCF podcasts and all that, but like the very casual fan base, it seemed like their reaction was just great. They're going to look like 2017 UCF again. They're going to go super fast and they're going to score 1,000,000 points and it's going to be high flying and fun. And there are a couple, I don't know if misconceptions are the right words, but there are a couple things I want to clear up. The first is that I think we are genuinely misremembering the Scott Frost offense a little bit. The insane pace was really more of a Heupel thing than a Frost thing. They played fast under Frost. They didn't play blazing fast, never stop, no changes in tempo. In 2017, they ranked 58th in plays per game. Like they were not, that like the whole, Heupel really upped that. And that wasn't necessarily as much of a thing under Frost. The other just truth of the situation is that 6 or 7 years ago, like the spread up tempo offense it wasn't new, but it was still not something that was all across football. And it was something that defenses had a harder time with. And it's like college football and football in general are always an arms race and things ebb and flow. Defenses know how to deal with that now. That's not like a magic trick anymore. So it's going to look different. Frost has been pretty open about that. And I think that's fine. I think that's a good thing. I think it would be a way bigger concern if he got up there and had said, yeah, this worked for us in 2017 and we went undefeated. So we know that we can win that way. Let's do it again because football's changed.
Yeah, there's a lot of elements that go into like there's the element that football has changed. There's an element that Scott Frost has changed. Obviously, he had been gone at Nebraska for how many years was he in? I always forget. It was like
5 years, I think.
5 years. And then the quick stop in Los Angeles with the Rams and Sean McVay and like what he learned. And I think in his press conference a couple weeks ago, he talked a lot more about like his time with the Rams teaching him kind of how McVay ran things. I'm sure there was some element of like some offensive concepts he might have picked up. So I don't want to downplay it too much, but like I'm curious just as he's evolved as a coach and as kind of just a football mind, that's another part of it. And then there's also the fact that like, and this is probably true of every offense, but it's so QB dependent. Like 2017 offense looked like the 2017 offense because of the level of play that McKenzie Milton was at.
Right.
Like obviously it looked different in 2016. They were not as consistent with it because maybe the flashes were there, but it wasn't what it became. So it will depend on who wins the quarterback job. It will depend on if they have a capable quarterback available to run the offense the way that he wants him to. And yeah, I do think there's going to be a little bit more of a pragmatic approach. And he said that a couple weeks ago. Again, he was like, it's going to depend on the opponent. It's going to depend on what we need to do to win. Basically, he was like, we're just going to play however we need to win. And a lot of that comes with seeing what the offense and personnel looks like this spring.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I do think one of the hallmarks of the Frost offense that I think you would expect to return would be they liked to get a lot of guys involved, a lot of different skill guys involved. Like just, throughout the course of the game, it was never, like we've talked at nauseam at this point about how Gus was more of a like, find your guy and that's your guy. Mm-hmm. Frost was like, I want a lot of weapons that I can use in a lot of different ways. And we're going to really just mess you up by doing all kinds of crazy stuff you're not ready for. And I'm not sure we're going to see that this year because I'm just not sure they have the skill depth anywhere to pull that off. So that might have to change a little bit.
They might have it at running back.
Running back.
I would feel like, we might realistically see 3 or 4 different running backs.
But even then, it's like, let's just be overly negative for a second is, all right, you have Jaden Nixon, who we think should be really good, but we don't know. He's a transfer. Transfers, as we've learned, are always a question mark. You've got Miles Montgomery, who we know is good when he's healthy, but him being healthy is not a given. And then you've got Tavion Swint, who's very highly rated, but wouldn't be the first very highly rated true freshman to come into UCF, and nothing really happens there. So we don't know. The flip side, all three, I can go positive, and you could absolutely be right that all three of those guys are already contributing in a big way this year, but I don't know.
And again, it's one of those things that it's one of the things we probably won't see in the spring, just from the little bit of access we do get, is because running backs you can never really tell unless they're going full tilt. But yeah, like at wide receiver, I don't know. Again, that's something we'll talk about a little bit more as we go. I don't know if they have one wide receiver, much less 5 or 6 that they want to get involved. So that's a lot of what the offense like. What the offense looks like this year may be completely different than what the offense looks like next year or the year after that, because there's a sense to me that like I guess he didn't put it in these terms, but it kind of just feels like they're just going to have to make do with what they have for this year and then keep building. That's at least maybe how I read things and how I think probably that's the reality they're faced with. But I don't know. We'll see it kind of come together a little bit as spring starts.
I mean, Frost was hired after signing day. As happens with modern coaching changes, the whole roster just went to the portal. I mean, he kind of did what he had. I mean, yeah, it's like I don't want to call this year a mulligan because that feels, overly excessive, but it's like at 2026 is more the year where we'll see the plan under Frost,
What did he say? Because he said it like in plain terms. He was like, we got here, we had like 50 players and we needed 85.
Yeah.
So like that, yeah, they had to go out there, and he also talked about how like he didn't have a list of like, here's who's in the portal, here's this. Like he just basically started with nothing. And that just sounds, I would have quit like immediately. I would have been like, oh cool, I got the job. I would have gotten to the office and been like, wait, there's nothing out here telling me like what to do next. I'm done.
Well, because we think about it like a video game, right? Like you think of it as kind of binary. Like player A is in the portal, player B is not in the portal. These are all like real people having real conversations about their lives and what they want to do next. And as we saw with guys like Chase and Johnson or whoever, it's like there are guys who they decide they want to go in the portal and they're gone. There's guys who are trying to convince to stay. And then there's guys who say, I actually want to come back. And guys who maybe on Monday, they tell you they're staying. And on Wednesday, they say, no, I'm not so sure. And maybe I need more money, or what can you promise me? And then you're talking with the collective, or you're talking with the AD and rev share and trying to figure out who's going to get what. And now this player's out the door. I don't even know how coaches handle it. It's total nonsense. But yeah, we'll see. They kind of have what they have at this point. It is interesting. The Athletic, one of my favorite things The Athletic does is they do a lot of articles where they grant coaches and personnel anonymity so that they can talk openly about stuff. And they always do like a portal wrap up where they talk with a lot of coaches anonymously about what team stood out to them. And UCF, really for no good reasons, UCF came up a couple times in the article. They came up because everyone was talking about how awesome Randy Pittman is and what a great get that is for FSU. And one anonymous coach said that they were, I forget what word they used, but they basically said they were sort of surprised and confused by the types of players UCF was taking. And they chalked that up to like, well, I guess they were just scrambling new staff. But I'm like, that's not what I love to hear from a coach of another team. But I really don't know what else they were supposed to do with the situation they were thrown into.
When you have to add 35 to 40 new players, there's going to be an element of scrambling. There's going to be an element of like, maybe we're going to have to take some guys that we otherwise wouldn't take just because we need bodies in the locker room and on the roster. So, I don't know. I don't think I can fault them too much for whatever their approach was then.
There was an interesting discussion on the Andy Staples show, or it's not called that anymore, Andy and Ari on 3, the national podcast, where they talked about, this was like a month ago, about if your roster was literally just the players who entered the portal, like you get all of them, but that's it. Like, could that team win a national championship? And the answer was kind of like, no. Like it's at the end of the day, it's like, it's just, we've learned that some teams tried it, and I think I was more bullish on it than I should have been. But there was a belief, right? We didn't know how the portal was going to work, that maybe you really can build a team this way. And the answer has just kind of been, no, you can't. You can supplement, you can get your team to over the hump or to the next level through the portal, but you can't just straight up build a roster through it. And UCF's had to build a roster through it this offseason, so it's probably not going to go great.
Who were the biggest examples of that last week? Because I know Ole Miss comes to mind. I think Florida State is probably even a more drastic example that comes to mind.
Well, Florida State is an interesting one because Florida State was the poster child for it working. Like the whole them going undefeated, that was a portal heavy roster. And it was all about Mike Norvell has cracked the portal and that's how they're going to build. And then you saw the other side of that where, a year later or 2 years, was it just 1 year later?
Yeah. It was all those great portal players that he got the previous year graduated or went to the NFL, and then he had to go do it again, and he couldn't.
Yeah, and it was one of the most expensive rosters in college football, and they went 2-10. So it's just, you can like try it year after year after year, and maybe one year it'll be like that, lightning in a bottle. You have a great team, but then that might happen the next year. It's just that, and I don't know. It's kind of there's examples on both sides, and then there's Clemson who declared that they will never use the portal at all, and literally was not taking transfers, and they fell off in the other direction. So it's finding the balance, and that's why we were kind of talking, because remember when we didn't know who the coach was going to be, we said one of our main things was we really didn't want someone who's just going to come build through the portal. And then Frost comes in and takes 30 portal guys. And we're trying to explain on the podcast, like, that's this, like, we don't know what Frost's strategy is for UCF's roster construction. We're not
going to know. He said what he wants it to be. But he can't do that this year.
You can say it, like, I don't know, like, even regardless of what he said, it's like, it's easy to say one thing. And then it's like, I bet since his opening press conference now, I bet the strategy has changed because he's learned more about what this world is like. But I don't know. This offseason it is what it is.
Yeah, this is great. Next in terms of it is what it is, quarterback competition.
Yes.
Actually, it could be. Wait, I don't know how I was going to say that. I was going to say it could be what it's not going to be in the future. That doesn't make sense, but they could end up trying to find another quarterback if things go terribly wrong in the spring, and they're like, "Wow, we need to see who becomes available elsewhere in the portal." But right now, as it stands, it's got to be a 3-man race, right? It's like Cam Fancher.
I'm thinking Cam Fancher obviously is number one on the list.
Need you to stop. This bit is grinding my gears.
It's going to be all off season.
I quit. Dylan Risk, Jakari Brown, Taven Jackson. Obviously, Taven Jackson being the outside addition. Cam Fancher also an outside addition from FAU. I don't know. I told you like a couple weeks ago that like for some reason Risk is my pick right now, just because I just feel like there's something about him where I was like, all right, and maybe it's purely just the small sample size from last year and the little bit of good that I did see was better than anything else we saw from the quarterbacks last year. But I don't know. I don't know enough about Taven Jackson to say like, oh, he can't work out either. But it's our first look at these three kind of under this system and in this competition.
Taven Jackson versus Dylan Risk feels like a very straightforward parallel to John Rice Plumlee versus Mikey Keene, but like if no one was excited about either option. I feel like is the easiest way I can say it. And I do feel like Risk is, I'm kind of interested in this because am I off base if I say that it feels like the fan base is rooting for Dylan Risk? Like, I don't know. It's like I don't see a lot of Taven Jackson hype on Twitter and social media. No. I see you think he's going to be the guy, but it seems like more of the interest and excitement is in Risk.
I think that's true, but I also wonder how much of that is by default.
Just because he's what we know. He's what we saw. Well, saw Jakari Brown too. Yeah,
but I think what we saw from those two, it's easier to pick one over the other, and it could quickly change. Everybody remembers how quickly we saw people gassing up John Rice Plumlee for a throw he made in a spring game.
Yep.
So Taven Jackson can have one cool highlight, and everyone's gonna be like, "Oh, the Big 12 isn't ready for Taven Jackson this year." We're gonna see that phrase somewhere after like one like very small thing, minuscule.
Well, the fans now have, and these two scrimmages these two practices that UCF is opening, we don't have the first clue what these are going to look like. I highly doubt they are going to be the same type of practice you would have seen if they're not open. But it's interesting because at the same time, I don't know, I've been swinging back and forth on this because my initial take when that news dropped was like UCF is not going to show anything. We will get to see guys stretching for an hour, then we all go home. But you only get X amount of spring practices. You're only allowed to have X amount of them. And I'm not sure the staff is going to want to just blow 2 of those because fans are going to be there. So we probably will see some legit stuff. And maybe perceptions. I'm willing to bet UCF's going to get a good chunk of people out for those. And maybe perceptions will change if, we see some really cool throws from, one of these guys, maybe not so much Jakari based on what we saw in season this year. But I don't know. And to remind you, just if you're listening and you're kind of like, fuzzy on, I know they brought in Taven Jackson, but like, who is he again? Taven Jackson was a 4-star recruit, went to Tennessee, transferred to Indiana from Tennessee after his true freshman season. At Indiana, he initially won the job over Brendan Sorsby, and then he lost that job midway through the season. This was 2023. Then he was the backup for 2024. He started one game while Curtis Rourke was injured. And in all of his performances, he was always just kind of fine. He was the type of player where he would occasionally do something where you go, oh, dang, right, he was a 4-star, but then would also do a lot of like, probably wanted that throwback or not reading the field well or making some poor decisions. So he's just kind of, he's not the savior, but he's also probably not going to like actively lose you games.
I have stats for all 3 of them in the limited action they had last year. Who do you want first?
Let's go likelihood of starting. So let's start with Taven.
Okay. Taven Jackson last year, again, limited action, 62.2% completion percentage, 349 yards, 4 touchdowns, 1 interception. He ran 15 times for 73 yards and 3 more touchdowns. So 7 total touchdowns, 1 pick. I would assume Risk is next.
Yep.
61.5% completion percentage, 904 yards, 5 passing touchdowns, 2 interceptions. I didn't write down his rushing stats because they were pretty much nothing. He had like 43 yards on maybe like 20 carries. Then Jakari Brown, passing stats, 52.2% completion percentage, 398 yards, 1 touchdown, 4 interceptions. Then the rushing was obviously what everyone liked to see from him. 53 carries, 401 yards, he averaged 7.6 yards a carry, and he had 4 rushing touchdowns. So
I've decided based on this conversation, I would like some Jakari packages regardless of who the starter is named.
I had the same thought because like, I don't even know if I thought like I would like to see it. It would more just be like, I could see that happening. I could see them doing that because
he's really athletic. And honestly, he was getting packages after risk. I don't even know if unseated him is the right word. They were just kind of like throwing darts at the wall
just
at that point.
Well, let's see.
They were just like, whatever. Like we if you start 3, you can start 4. Like we did not like, how like they say like with the COVID-19 pandemic, which is timely, 5-year anniversary, how like people will be like, oh yeah, it was like so crazy at the time, but like you kind of compartmentalized and like you didn't realize until later how crazy that time was. I feel that way with UCF starting 4 quarterbacks with 0 injuries. Like we will look back on that season and just say to ourselves, how did that possibly happen? That they started 4 different quarterbacks and there was never an injury involved in any of these decisions.
It's still like every time we talk about this, I've said it on the podcast, maybe last week or maybe it was 2 weeks ago, that like quarterbacks have done worse and like not been benched than what like KJ Jefferson like was at the time. I was like, okay, yeah, like fine, I'm done with him. But they lost 2 games?
Yep.
No, yeah, 2 games. Yes. It was Colorado and Florida.
They were 3-2 when he got benched.
Yeah, but like it really looking back, like it did not make sense considering what came next. And maybe what made even less sense was not like, okay, they started EJ for a drive or 2 and then brought in Jakari. I guess Jakari did like a little bit up front to like be like, okay, let's see what he has here. But like never were they like, okay, let's just go back to KJ. Like once KJ didn't play, he was just done. And
yes,
in hindsight, that made no sense. Like the season fell off the rails, and not at any point were they like, let's see if this guy who started for years in the SEC can kind of like get us back on track just a little bit. I know he didn't play very well, and I know he wasn't what everybody wanted him to be or thought he was going to be when he transferred in, but his play didn't warrant them starting 3 more quarterbacks without even thinking about going back to him.
I don't even like, you're right. Cause it was very weird that it wasn't so much like they had benched KJ. It was like, KJ is no longer a member of the on-field team. Like he gets to be on the sideline, but like, that's it. And I don't know. I give a little bit of grace because I think while in hindsight, that was probably a premature benching. And I think us and a lot of people believe that they would have probably won the Cincinnati game if they had just played KJ. But yeah, it was probably a little too early. And all of that, I don't even know why we're relitigating this, but the KJ one is crazy. It is. It's in hindsight, it's like that was weird to bench him that early when they were 3-2, and then also be like, we're never going back to him
with no plan. They benched him with no plan.
The craziest one is starting 17-year-old EJ Colson and benching him for no goddamn reason. Benching him because Johnny Richardson fumbled the ball in a different part of the field. Twice. And they were like, we got to get EJ off the field because Johnny Richardson fumbled. And then they go to Jakari and be like, we've got the answer. And then 2 games later, after he's thrown 4 interceptions, be like, never mind, but let's not give EJ another shot. Let's go to Dylan Risk. Like, it's like every time they were faced with a decision, they were like, what's the craziest thing we can do here? And that's what they picked. It really is fascinating.
It's weird that we just went back down that road again, but I can tie it back into how much differently I would feel right now if EJ Colson was still a member of the UCF roster.
Oh, they made sure that was not going to be the case.
And I told you about this. I never brought it up on the podcast, but when I was at the Combine a couple weeks ago, I was constantly being reminded of EJ Colson because every time I went to go talk to a UCF player at their podium session, there was somebody. Obviously, we were in Indiana. Obviously, there was Purdue media, or whatever media who also covered Purdue. And so every UCF player was being asked about what EJ Colson was going to bring to the Purdue, quarterback room, to the locker room, and every UCF player was very complimentary of how he handled everything, considering how young he was, how he's only going to get better, how he's a baller. And I'm just sitting there like waiting to ask my questions, just like this. Just he could be our quarterback right now, and instead we have no idea who it's going to be, and none of the options are overly exciting to me. I guess as of right now, it could change. I just don't see myself getting like really amped up about any of these 3 options compared to what we could have had with EJ Colson.
You never know. And maybe EJ Colson never turns into anything, but maybe. It feels like the excitement level for the season is in a totally different place if EJ's in this room. Maybe he doesn't even win the job, but I don't know. He was someone the fan base was really excited for. And I don't hold an ounce of ill will toward him for leaving this team. I just have to imagine him standing on the sideline of that Cincinnati game. He must just been like, what the hell did I get benched for? Like, he must have just been there like, what, like, why? Like, he didn't do anything wrong. He looked good. He got 2 drives and they were like, get off the field. Johnny doesn't like you, get off. Like, it was so strange. And now he's with Darren Hinshaw for the other
now he's gone.
Team that wears space uniforms. So it's great.
Yeah. I don't know. We'll see what happens with it. I'm really curious. We are going to make it to, at least I'm going to try to make it to one of the scrimmages. Are you trying to go to both?
Yeah, I will.
Yeah. So we'll see what little bit we get from the quarterbacks.
Before we move on. The first one is, I will say that we may not learn a lot from the open practices. Historically, in my time covering UCF, by the end of spring ball, because people like to talk, we will usually know a thing or two about who's looking good at quarterback and who isn't. So there is a good chance that we will know some more about this towards the end of spring than we do right now.
Mm-hmm.
Second thing I want to say is, Bailey, predict it. Who's the QB?
Right now, so I said a few weeks ago it was going to be Dylan Risk. I think for some reason now I'm leaning Taven Jackson, and I don't know why.
I think I'm leaning Taven Jackson because of the quarterbacks we've discussed. He's the one that Frost and Milton brought in. So I feel like that might help. I have a second question. Well, third, because I guess I said 3 things. I don't know. I've lost track. Whatever.
This is the second question, but this
second
is the
question, third statement. All right, Bailey, you've predicted Taven Jackson as a starter. Does the same quarterback start the first and final game?
That's not this question. It's the first and the final game?
Yes. Same guy or no?
Yes.
You think it's the same guy, really? Do you think that person starts all the games?
So that was part of the reason I clarified, because I think there is a world where somebody else ends up starting a game, but they end up going back to Taven. And again, I'm basically just basing this off of something you said, which is just based off of not a lot of information, I wouldn't think, is where you were like, I don't know if he's going to be a superstar, but like I think Taven Jackson's not going to like lose you games. Like I think he'll come in, I think he'll be fine. I don't think he's going to be a disaster. So I think like the way this offense is going to be, I just don't know if it's going to be his fault that they're not flying high. So maybe he just starts the whole season and then they start over at quarterback next year. Or what year is he now? They have next year?
He should have 2 years, I believe. I'm going to double check really quickly, but I think he has 2 years of eligibility left.
And again, you never know. Like if he's starting this year, but he's not guaranteed the job for next year, he could transfer again. So
I am absolutely adamant that the 2026 starter is not the 2025 starter. Like I don't know why, but like I'm certain in my brain that it will not be the same guy.
Doesn't feel like that'll be the case.
Does he? Yeah. Taven has 2 years of eligibility left. Dylan Risk has 3. And I think Jakari Brown has 2. So these are all guys who, if someone wanted to step up, they could be a multi-year starter at UCF. I just feel like, and maybe this is incredibly harsh and mean of me, but I feel like if any of those guys are starting the first game of 2026, it means that something's gone horribly wrong for UCF at the quarterback position. So I don't know. I guess that could be the case, but it also could be really good. Risk, I can talk myself into. He takes a leap this offseason because we've seen that before, and that was his first real playing time ever in his collegiate career. And while he looked really rough at points, he looked really good at points. That's what happens when you have a young quarterback out there. I think Taven and Jakari both they are who they are at this point. Like we've seen them over multiple seasons. They are who they are.
Of the 2 interceptions that Dylan Risk threw, one of them they asked him to throw the ball from his own 1-yard line.
Yes.
On the road. Dumb.
Not a single sane decision was made over the course of the 2024 UCF football season. Not a single sane decision was made at any point.
Yeah. All right. We could have talked about quarterbacks probably for another 10 minutes.
All right, we're 44 minutes in, and we've done 2 of our 5 questions.
Question 3 isn't really a question. It's more just like what are things going to look like, both at offensive line and wide receiver. I just kind of lump these together because of the offense. Yeah, we talked about quarterbacks, running backs. We know who they have. I don't know. We know who they have at these positions, but we also don't know if any of them are good or what the composition of the rooms are going to look like. Offensive line, I guess we have a clearer picture.
I think so.
Wide receiver, but that's still kind of scary to say because they have one returner, and Paul Rubelt probably be the right tackle. They have guard Memilar, going to be one of the starting guards. That sounded weird to say, but okay.
Starting guard Memilar.
Yeah, and then from there, we'll kind of see. Carter Miller is another one they brought in from the portal. Sean Clark, the new offensive line coach, did say in his last press conference that he's going to start off at center. He can play guard, obviously, and I think he had said something along the lines of like, it's all interchangeable. He's like, if you can play guard, I want you to play center. But if you can play center, you can also play guard. If you're a guard, I think you can also play tackle, which I'm sure is more of a case-by-case thing. I don't know if that's always true. Herb Hand,
I don't think that's always true, but
Herb Hand, philosophy it seems like too. But
Herb Hand's philosophy was none of you have positions. You are going to play where I say you're going to play, and you're going to figure it out.
So the other options on the interior spots, Jabari Brooks, Cam Kenny, Walt Claire Flynn, and then the other tackle is any one of another 4 guys they brought in from the portal: Preston Cushman, Ja'Kai Leftwich, Justin Royez, and LaParca Langston.
Yeah.
Those are the names. They are names make an
exist.
Offensive line out of that group.
All right. Rubelt at right tackle.
Mm-hmm.
Carter Miller at center.
Mm-hmm.
Guard Memillard, either guard spot. I feel really good about those 3. You just got to figure out 2 more.
Yeah.
Which, like if you don't figure those out, like having 2 glaring holes in your O-line will probably hurt the season. But I don't know. I think they have 3 guys I feel good about, and then it's just you kind of got to puzzle piece the rest and see what you can do.
I just need them to not be a disaster.
Well, we'll see. Maybe they will be. Who knows?
The remaining guys, like I need them to step in, and if they can play replacement level football, I'll feel okay about where things are.
I don't think I should feel this way, given that I saw it from a different position group in 2023. But like, I feel like any position group being bad, I can talk myself into UCF overcoming it. I just can't with the O-line. Like if the O-line's bad, it's just like you're just kind of cooked on offense.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. There are other positions where I don't think I could talk myself into it, but that's the thing is like the offense. We talked about what the offense would look like, what these quarterbacks could do. Both of those things will also hinge on how good the offensive line can be.
And that's interesting because aren't those things kind of hand in hand? Because like, say for example, like I don't know, but like say UCF just loves Dylan Risk, throws a great ball. If they realize they just don't have an O-line that's going to hold up, then they're going to have to look at what these guys can do with their legs. And then does Ja'Kari rise because he may not throw the ball well, but at least he's going to be able to get out of there when things collapse? I don't know.
I think so, and I think there was an element of that back when. I don't want to bring him up again, but back in the John Rice Plumlee days, I think
my God.
there was an element of that where he could do things with his legs. So he go vroom and he could overcome some other issues. But I don't know. It was weird because like maybe this is hindsight and this is just I'm thinking more. I don't know. I'm not thinking as clearly about stuff in the past. I don't know what the word is for that. But I don't feel like their offensive line was ever that bad to where they needed the guy who was
it was not
running guy.
Their offensive line was perfectly fine every year Herb Hand was here.
Yeah.
That was unfortunately just, by the way, I just love that last week I was like, we are done talking about John Rice Plumlee, and you and I have both independently brought him up on the podcast now.
Yeah. But again, we're not answering questions about him ever again. Mailbag questions about that quarterback are dead. No more mailbag questions about him. Wide receiver is we talked about it when we kind of broke down the roster a couple weeks ago, and I did it again, like just listed some names off, and I'm scared.
Yeah, it's pretty it's bleak, to be totally honest. I don't know what's going to happen here because I feel like for what I just said about with offensive line, there are some pieces we know we can feel good about, and it's just figuring out the rest of the puzzle. There are things you can do to make it work, move guys around, whatever. Wide receiver is very much just like you got what you got. And you don't got a lot. So I don't know. It's I don't even know what the best case scenario is. Like you hope TJ Black moving up 2 levels can do this. You hope that the hype of Bradell Richardson that we never saw because he wasn't playing pays off. You hope Waden Charles is a superstar true freshman. Like, I don't know. There are not a lot of avenues for this. Like, I'm not saying like, I think someone will end up hitting. There will be a wide receiver who will be here in December and be like, he was really good. Sure. I don't think so, but maybe. The odds of there being 3 guys where we were like, yeah, no, they all did really well. That feels like close to 0, the chances of that happening.
Yeah. And that's what's so funny about like with spring ball, I feel less like we'll come out of spring ball being like, oh, they've got some really good options here, and more just kind of like, all right, here's who they seem to be starting right now. Like here's where the depth chart kind of looks. And how like it could change obviously, but like we'll have more of a picture of like who's going to be getting the opportunities up front, much less about like, yeah, that guy's going to be a star. Unless like we got that from Bradell last spring, was like, oh, he's the best, and then we never got to see him play.
But again, I don't trust any decision Gus Malzahn made as head football coach. So like,
Yeah.
I don't think that means that Burdell didn't live up to the hype. I think
No,
that means
I
that
don't
he
think that
was,
at all.
You know, yeah, I think that I mean, I'm really hopeful that Burdell will be it. Now, what sucks is that the number one way for a guy to take a leap is for him to play. It's just different being out there in a game than in practice. And I think he could have benefited a lot from playing last year. And I really don't know what the hell UCF was like holding on to by the end of the year. They were asked might have been Tim Harris. Someone on offense was asked about Burdell late in the season, like, why isn't he out there? And he just gave the sort of answer of like, oh, he's really good and we really like him a lot, but like, ready? I don't know. And I'm like, what are you playing for? Like, there was nothing left.
4-7.
Good Lord. Got to win that Black Friday game. They didn't. But yeah, well, I don't know. What I was going to say was that for the open practices, I genuinely think I'm more curious about seeing the wide receivers than the quarterbacks. Just because the quarterbacks, I don't think there's a catastrophe there. I think they'll find someone who will be fine. Wide receiver is very much still in catastrophe territory for me.
Yeah. And that person that may be fine at quarterback could be more than fine if at least one receiver emerges. Because, I mean, you need one main guy, maybe another guy can be contributor. And then you got Dylan Wade at tight end, who we're excited about. And we'll see.
Call it now.
Yeah.
Does Dylan Wade lead UCF in receiving yards in 2025?
No.
I hope you are correct.
But you know how he does is if it's like 500 and something, and like nobody else has.
I wasn't saying I'm predicting Dylan Wade is going to inexplicably as a tight end have like 900 receiving yards. I just am wondering if this is going to be a situation where there are like a bunch of guys in the like 100 to 250 range.
It's possible. It's very possible. Now that you say that, I'm picturing the ESPN stats page, and I'm like, oh, I could see his name at the top. All right, question 4. What are we going to see from Alex Grinch's defense? This is such a weird feeling that I'm having about UCF's defense because I look at the pieces and I'm like, it's a pretty good defense.
Yeah.
And then I'm like, okay, but like there was a reason that Alex Grinch went from one of the hottest names in college football to, oh my God, I can't believe UCF hired Alex Grinch.
Yeah.
And I was going back and listening to Frost's press conference earlier from a few weeks ago, and he was asked about Grinch, and I think it confirmed kind of how I thought Frost viewed him, in that he sees himself in him as far as once a star in the coaching profession, obviously went somewhere else that didn't work out, and now they're trying to like rediscover that magic. And cool, like I'm all for like hopefully that happens, but I don't know. Like I think at the very least he has some good pieces to work with, and I think that is a good starting point.
I'm trying to balance my faith in UCF athletics as an organization and the fact that this entire offseason from a national perspective was people just over and over on social media going, what the hell is UCF doing? Like when they rehired Scott Frost, no one understood that. And we've talked about at length on this podcast why you kind of have to be in the Orlando community to understand why this could work. But then they followed it up with Alex Grinch. And the Frost one was like, that's weird. Okay. The Alex Grinch one was all of college football unanimously going, why would they ever give him that job? And I understand what you just talked about and what Frost has said. Like clearly Frost has been very open about the whole chip on your shoulder, rising star. Like I think that genuinely is a bonding point for them, I'm sure, because these are two guys who once upon a time were hot shots and rising stars in college football, and now they are the opposite of that. But I'm in the same boat as you, where on paper, if I had to I was forced to try to talk someone into UCF being like very good this year, like winning 8 games or something, I would start with the defense, because I actually think this is a legit Big 12 defense. I don't feel bad about the defense at all. And I don't want to sit here and be like, yeah, I think they hired a DC so bad that he's going to come in and wreck all that, because I don't believe that. It's just he just kind of is going to have to prove it to us, because there is just people have such incredibly negative opinions of him and his ability to run a defense that it's just kind of hard to believe that the entire college football world is wrong, especially when this was a problem at multiple stops for him.
Because here's how that conversation would go if you were trying to sell UCF in 2025 to someone and saying, yeah, they got a solid defense. Look, up front, they've got Malachi Lawrence. They've got Nigel Kelly, John Walker. They picked up R.J. Jackson from Tulsa, Horace Lockett, Sincere Edwards. Pretty good front. They've got some guys they believe in at linebacker. The Oklahoma guys, Lewis Carter, Phil Picciotti, Cole Kozlowski they're excited about from Colgate, Kelly Lawson, another guy who transferred in from Virginia Tech. And then they've got a lot of guys to choose from and some established guys in the secondary. person be like, oh, sounds like a pretty good group there. Who's the defensive coordinator? You go, Alex Grinch. I say, who? Alex Grinch. And they'd be like, oh my God, that guy's a job. And that's how the conversation would go. And it's unfortunate. And I don't say that to be mean about Alex Grinch. I hope he proves everyone wrong, including us. But he has the reputation he has for a reason. And I just really hope that we can see him overcome that, because if not, we're going to be looking for a new defensive coordinator next year, probably.
All he has to do is coach 9 games and he lasts longer than Ted Roof. But 2 things really quickly. The first is that I'm so mad because you read that defense out to me and I'm like, I love that defense. I feel really, really good about basically every part of that defense. There's question marks. There's guys who we're assuming are going to be good. Like linebacker, that's still a lot of up in the air guys. But it's like between those 3, Lewis Carter, Phil Picciotti, and Cole Kozlowski, feeling good there. And then we go back to Alex Grinch. And the other thing I want to say is that, because I know some UCF fans are already getting kind of pissed at the anti-Grinch stuff, is I'm not like, it's like the thing I feel like the caveat we have to give every 4 or 5 episodes. What?
The anti-Grinch stuff just sounded funny. So I'm just thinking of like.
All right, listen up, Whoville. Sure, that's a joke he's never heard before.
His heart grew 3 sizes. He's a good guy. All right, go ahead. Sorry, I derailed that, but the phrase anti-Grinch stuff just made me laugh. So
Frost and Grinch is insane, but I
can't wait for the winter time.
There are going to be so many very stupid comments we will make and others will make. But the thing about Grinch is, now I'm in my head about it. I can't even say his name. The thing about Coach Alex is I'm not sitting here. I'm not here going, gosh, I really hope that when December rolls around, I can brag to everyone about how right I was about the DC being bad. I want to have to eat my own words on this so freaking badly, but it's just, as we've said a million times in this podcast, we're not the cheerleader podcast. I'm not going to sit here and say, yeah, new era, so they'll be awesome. This was a weird choice for DC. Everyone thinks it was a weird choice for DC. There are very legitimate questions about why they went this way, and I'm hoping it works, but I'm not convinced it's going to.
Yeah, we'll see. I don't know. We're not going to get much of an answer out of spring, but we're at least going to see how the defense starts to look. In terms
we're going to get out there. We're going to get out there to the open practice and be like, DBs are like running into each other in like practice.
I thought you were like the defense is all like lined up and they're doing 11 on 11s, and Grinch is just like looking in a different direction. They're like, Coach, we're over here, and he's just like, oh, okay. No. We'll see.
I'm just imagining he's like, it's like, what's that gif of the guy carrying like the 4 like buckets of water and the hose and stuff, and just like starts dropping out. Like Grinch is just on the sideline.
Falls over like the hood of the car. Oh man, I hope not. I'm rooting for him. What if I just become like very like positive pro Alex Grinch? Big Grinch
I am
guy.
pro Alex Grinch.
I just mean like I'm just gonna like ignore all of the like warning signs that this is gonna be horribly wrong, and I'm just gonna be like, he's great. He's learned.
On the flip side though, like let's just flip it for a second. Scott Frost and Alex Grinch joining forces to have like a very good team would be so funny for the rest of college football to like have to justify that somehow.
Yeah, no, it would be. I hope it happens. Me
too.
Last question, last thing, topic. Kind of just, is there going to be a difference in how the access to this team is from both a media and kind of just a fan standpoint? Obviously, we talked about the lack of a spring game. They're doing the 2 open practices instead, but it's obviously just the team's under a different direction now. Obviously, we talked a lot about Gus Malzahn running it like it was the CIA or something, and no one could ever, like, the media would attend practice for stretching, and that's just about it. They'd only talk to the players that athletics would bring them. Couldn't really request one-on-ones with players like you could previously when Frost was here. So kind of curious to see, like, from that standpoint, how this spring looks, and also like just if any more info, we can get any more info out of just this spring practices than we did last year or the year before.
Yeah, and I don't want to get too inside baseball on the media side of it, because I'm sure like you guys listening, your favorite thing is like, media members complain about, not having more media coverage. But it really, the reason it's interesting to me is because things were nuts under Gus. And I feel like we can be a little more open about that now that he's gone. And my issue was that Gus came into UCF and he had just been at Auburn, which is a very different vibe. It's a college town where, it's like he steps outside his house and it's like paparazzi scenes. Like it is the center of the universe is Auburn football in that town. And he tried to run UCF the same way. It was very combative. It was very, the goal is to like, protect, our players and all this and keep them away from all that. And the reason that bothered me and the reason I think it hurt fans is that, that makes sense at Auburn where like you have to do everything you can to limit that coverage or it gets out of control. It's like, that's not the vibe at UCF. Orlando's a big city. UCF's a big deal when they're good. They're not necessarily when they're bad. And it just felt like it got to a point where you were hurting fans' ability to build relationships with these athletes when you were denying those athletes the ability to speak for themselves and the ability to get their brands out there and their stories out there. And I know I've said this example on the podcast before, but part of what made the 2017 team so cool is we knew Mackenzie Milton's story. We knew about him growing up in Hawaii with his brothers and coming here and having a hard time and wanting to transfer out, but he sticks it out and he becomes this great player. We knew about Shaquem and everything he had gone through in that story and anecdotes.
Living
like
in the
I was literally about to say, I think I was at that access where he dropped that, where he's just like, I've been sleeping in the facility. And we're like, what? He's like, yeah. And it's just that, and honestly, this is going to sound so stupid. And if you've never been in like the media scene, you're not going to believe it, but I swear to God, so much of this was UCF opting to only do press conference access. I cannot overstate how different an athlete or a coach speaks to you when they are up on a podium, standing there, fielding questions from a room of reporters than when either it's one-on-one or even just, it used to be like when you and I were like covering the team in our heyday when you were in college, it's like there would be scrums. Like they'd bring players into the room, they'd stand in different areas, you go walk up, talk to them. It's a completely different vibe. It doesn't feel combative. It doesn't feel, like they have to guard themselves. And that's how you build relationships with the fan base, is they learn about these guys and they learn to care about them. And the thing that really bugged me, especially when things were going bad in the Gus era, is like, how you build yourself some more goodwill from the fan base when they really are rooting not just for the team because it's their team, but they're rooting for you. They're rooting for your guys. And why deny them that? So I'm not expecting things to just go back to how they were under Frost, because things were super loosey-goosey under Frost. I would text the SID the night before practice and go, can I talk to Killens? And he'd be like, yeah, probably. And I get there and he would look for Killens, go, there he is. And Killens would come off the field and I go, hi, I'm Christian. Killens would go, I have an exam. And I'd go, damn it, I'll talk to you on Thursday. And then he'd walk off. And that was how access worked back then. So it's definitely not going to go back to that. And that's probably fine. But and I think things were starting to turn, like the RJ Harvey stuff that UCF put out. I don't know if it was just Gus finally loosened up or what, but by the very end of Harvey's UCF career, they were finally like putting his story out there more and just get us more of that. This whole rebuild will be so much more palatable if like fans like Taven Jackson and know things about him, know what his life is like, know what he's like as a person. Don't just hear him walk up on a stage once a week and go, yeah, we got to be better, because that doesn't build anything for anybody.
Outside of, I guess, the guys who are established, like John Walker, like guys who we've seen before, even though we haven't heard from John Walker that much either. So like that might even be a good example. But what was probably the biggest like example in recent months of a player earning themselves immediate goodwill of the fan base? Do you know which one I'm referencing?
No, I really don't, which is bad. I don't know. Dylan Risk being hyped about Frost coming in.
Tavion Swint writing that commitment thing in the USA Today and talking about why he committed to UCF, and everyone was like, I love this guy already. Like, just, give the fans more access to these guys, and they're going to buy into this team as a team and not just an entity. Because everybody obviously is going to root for UCF. It's UCF. People went there. They grew up rooting for them, whatever. But when you start to root for players because of their knowing their backgrounds, it just becomes more of a family feel like it was back then. And that's part of the reason it became that back then. And I do hope it kind of returns to that a little bit, just giving everyone a little bit more of a reason. And especially in an NIL era where, like, I know it's not the most popular thing to do, because honestly, you see some like the players who do like their own NIL shops or whatever, the designs are never that great. So, but some people still just want to buy something to support a player. And you give these players more chances to do that if you're giving them more chances to speak openly to the public, to for them to consume it. More often than not, you wouldn't even know anything about any of these guys, because like you said, up at the podium, all they're doing is just giving like pretty basic answers, very media trained answers to what's going on the field. Nothing personal, just more so, oh, how you guys feeling this week? Like it's a different environment, like you said. So
I can't overstate, if you haven't been, it is an entirely different vibe. And it just, and that's why it's like, I just want to be clear that it's not something where I go, I, as a person who covers the team, would really like to just be able to talk to players more. I think that's fun. It's like, no, it's the conduit to the fans, and it's the relationship building. And I'll give another self-serving example from like years ago when I was covering UCF, when I was able to be out there like every day. And I was freelancing for the Orlando Sentinel at the time, and I was going to do a story on Caleb Houston and Gage Marcel in 2016, the punter and snapper. And I think that was partially just because, like, it was, like, what are you going to talk about this season? Let's talk about special teams. And Caleb Houston was really good back in the day. And so I requested them, talked to them one-on-one, just both of them at the same time. And I don't remember how it came initially, but one of them was like, yeah, no, we even got like matching lip tats. And I was like, well, what do you mean by that? And I still have the photo on my phone. I was just like, well, let me see. And they just pulled down their lips, and they had, and Caleb had a punt lip tat, and Gage had a snap with a $ for the S lip tat. And I just took a photo with my phone. I was like, that's awesome. And then that story and that photo, like, that was published in the Orlando Sentinel. That became like a thing. It's like, just, that sounds like, might not sound like significant in like the grand scheme of things, but it was like little stories like that is like how fans become close with the team. And really root not just for, I'm a UCF fan, so I want UCF to do well, but really are invested in the individual players. And I think it was such a mistake for UCF to move away from that, in part because that has never been more important than in this era, where players are coming in and out the door. That's like, it's never been harder to build those relationships. So why put up more barricades or put up more barriers for that to happen?
Another example that is more to serve your ego than mine, but the story you did on Shaquan Burkett that year in 2017. There was more of a chance to do these personal features, and not all of it being, UCF obviously does a great job with their content, and they'll produce some very good content on their own, but like some of it is like you get less of here's what we want out there, and more just like people who they honestly are. And I think that's hopefully maybe not going to go completely, like you said, they're not going to go completely back in the other direction like they were before, but hopefully it's something that improves over the whole Gus regime, because that got very annoying. And
I wonder if Frost over Gus, if even on the interior side of things, like I wonder if UCF content will have more leeway to do things like that than they did.
That's a good point too,
because I'm sure they would have done more. I don't think it was like, I think Gus really set the tone on that one, that you're not, we can't, unfortunately, fans could not know anything about our players because reasons, I don't know.
Yeah.
I do think it was a lot of paranoia. I think it was,
I think so.
We highlight this guy and then he hops in the portal, or, and it's just like, it's like, I don't think it's ever been that deep. I really don't think that, like, if you posted a tweet and said, hey, this player had this fun thing happen to him, that his backup would be like, well, then I'm going to the portal. Like, I just don't think that's the way it works.
Yeah. And I mean, I don't know. It's not like, if that was the case, I don't know if you really want that backup on the team anyway. Like, if it's
literally such a good point. Like, if there was a backup who was going to leave the team because there was a story about, or not even a story, but just some fun anecdote about the player ahead of him, then it's like, what do you really, you're risking it all to keep that guy on the team? I don't know.
Yeah. All right. So we'll see. We'll see how spring ball goes. I'm excited just to get back to Orlando in, I guess, about a little less than a month for that practice and just to hang out. But yeah, that'll be fun. We'll move into the football news real quick. We talked about the scrimmages. So the only other piece of news was actually pretty big news. UCF Houston, the space game for this season, was moved from Saturday, November 8th to Friday, November 7th.
Yeah, man.
So I'm excited.
That's very exciting. I'm trying to be, because I understand that people who live out of town are angry, some of them, and I don't want to be like, I don't care, but it's
you don't want to be UCF Athletics telling you to not buy season tickets anyway.
What if that was them laying the groundwork for the space game all those weeks in advance? No, I mean, I really do. I think it's very exciting. So a bunch of Big 12 games. This was basically every week they're moving some Big 12 games to Fridays, which obviously each of those games will now have a much larger spotlight on it than it would have if it had remained on Saturday. And I think it's one of the things that was coolest to me was I love, because let's be real, UCF Houston, not going to be an interesting game this year, most likely, barring some really unforeseen things. And I think it's very cool that the Big 12's TV partners see the space game as something worth highlighting, see something that is valuable enough to them that they want it in its own window. And this is going to be most likely probably the biggest spotlight that's ever been on the space game. The most watched space game ever was Oklahoma State in 2023. Temple in 2018 was a weeknight game. That was a Thursday night game, I believe. But at the end of the day, it was still Temple. So it was, that one also got over 1 million. But I really do think there's a shot that whatever season this is for UCF, this is going to be the most watched space game ever now, depending on what network this ends up on. And it is UCF's coolest tradition. I think it's one of the coolest traditions in college football, and a lot of people outside of UCF think that as well. And to get to expose what that atmosphere is like and what that game is like to the wider college football nation, and you know what it's like all the fans in the stands dressed as aliens and astronauts and all this stuff, and the broadcast always gets so into it. What I'm sure are going to be some freaking insane uniforms is That is so freaking cool to me. And it's nice that, like, however this season goes, we know that at least one night this season, UCF's going to be able to spotlight a really, really cool thing they do to the whole nation. And I'm super excited for that.
Yeah. I mean, like, UCF Houston on a Saturday, no one watches it. It gets lost in the entire shuffle. On a Friday night being, as of right now, one of two games. The other game, I think I told you, what I say was Tulane and Memphis, I think. Yeah, 2 games on a Friday night and it being the space game. Like, I love that. And I understand, like, I do understand the frustrations for a lot of people who can't make it out to a Friday night game. I'm in a spot with, like, my job where I have some flexibility to be able to do that. So I'm lucky in that sense. But yeah, I think for the most part, it's a very, very cool thing that's going to benefit UCF in a big way in terms of the spotlight. So
y'all have PTO.
Cool. Yeah.
Figured out.
All right, game of the week. It will be number 25 UCF softball at 19, 8-1, 2-1 in the Big 12, playing at number 3 Florida, who is 26-2, 2-1 in the SEC. That game is Wednesday at 6:00. Top 25 matchup. UCF coming off of a series win at number 4 Arizona. I don't know. Things are looking really good and really fun for both softball and baseball right now, and I'm really enjoying this spring so far. So I hope it keeps going.
Yeah, I really, I think it was on our last podcast, we talked about how, hey, softball, they weren't supposed to be that amazing this year. And it seems like they might be a little ahead of schedule, but let's wait till conference play starts. Then they open conference play with a series win over a top 5 team. Seems solid. So yeah, I don't know if they're going to be Florida. That's always a tough one. And it's one they've had issues with in the past, but like, God, I want them to so badly because
especially
the hype is getting really real.
1 week after UCF baseball beat Florida.
In like knockdown fashion too.
Yeah.
And that game just had so many things. It had UCF winning by a lot. It had a child holding a beer in the stands, which was something. It had at one point, I don't know, did you watch that game or no?
No, I was at the Lightning game.
My favorite point in that game was there was a foul ball, and they didn't show it on the broadcast, but they told us immediately, like, oh, this fan had it in his hands, and then he dropped it. And then over the next 5 minutes, 3 separate times, they cut to a close-up shot of this fan's face and talked about what a bad job he did trying to catch the foul ball. And I don't know. I love broadcast decisions like that. I think bullying fans is important, and I thought that was a super interesting choice.
All righty. Speaking of bullying fans, tweet of the week.
Tweet of the week, and boy, are we going to. Tweet of the week this week goes to Robert at BowlingBoss1992 on Twitter, who was kind enough to reply to me after the Space Game news drops that would be moved to a Friday, and I tweeted how I was excited for UCF to have this spotlight. He replied to me and said, "A Friday game, ... This isn't some big flex. That's a slap in the face. Yes, we'll be cool to get a night game, but that slot is trash." So I would like to challenge you, not just Robert, but all of us here on UCF social media and really just in the world, is let's do a new thing where we stop acting like authorities on things we don't understand at all. Because that is freaking crazy. If you are that dense on how college football TV and media works that you think getting your own slot on a Friday night where you are the game, the only Power 4 game of the entire game, is a trash slot, or that's a slap in the face to UCF. As you said earlier, Bailey, if UCF Houston had remained on Saturday, that game is going to be on FS1, FS2, or ESPN+. It will be watched by no human beings outside of the Orlando area, not even in Houston, because they don't have fans. It'd be nothing. Now it's on a Friday night. It's the only Power 4 game that night. It's going to probably get 1 million+ viewers, and it's going to be a huge, huge opportunity for UCF to showcase itself. So I'm not saying that everyone has to understand that. I'm just saying you don't have to get all high and mighty about things you don't know anything about. And I think we could all do better at that. I think I could do better at that. Maybe I should stop talking about Rich Wallace and UCF baseball. Who knows? But I think it's a stretch goal for us all.
I'm just going to start using that against you. Anytime you text me anything about UCF baseball, it's negative after one loss. I'm just going to say, listen to your own advice there, bud.
You should do it even when they're doing well. Like, I'm like, hey, good win for UCF baseball. You're like, shut up.
Shut up. You don't know anything about baseball.
Okay, can I immediately, and I know we're like way long, but can I immediately then like do that again with baseball?
Sure.
Why is everyone so hyped about being Monmouth or Monmouth or however you say it?
I think, so you texted me this yesterday and I was like, I didn't realize people work, so I wasn't really on Twitter much at the time. I don't know. I didn't see that. I would hope it's more about the fact that they've won 6 straight and are 12-3. And
I saw a lot of it. It was just people posting the score and being like, whoa, Rich Wallace is building something, you know?
Well, what was the score of yesterday's game? Actually, I don't even
8-0?
remember. It was, okay, so I think it's, I would hope, coming to the defense of the fans here, I'm hoping it's less about the opponent and more about the fact that, like, over the last 5 games, I think it's been, like, they 10-run ruled USF. I think they scored, like, 12 runs on Saturday. They scored 12 more on Sunday. They scored 13 against Florida. They scored like 17 in the first game against Monmouth. I think it's just like the fact that the offense is just mashing right now.
Sure.
Is getting people hyped. Hopefully that's the case and not overreaction.
We'll roll with that. I've been a little mean to fans on the last few minutes here, so we'll roll with that.
Okay, cool. Let's do that. We will be back. We'll be back next week with episode 260. Until then, you can find us on Twitter at BaileyJAdams22, at by CA Simmons, at Night Sports Now, and at Pegasus Podcast. Thank you guys so much for being with us, and we will talk to you next week.
Bye, everybody.